Hiya. So I know it's a bit of a running joke that students in the UK tend to just whinge and moan about student finance a lot. But honestly, I have had more than my fair share of dealings with the mess of an establishment that is Student Finance England, particularly this year after some really terrible communication on their part and a very complicated family situation on my part left me receiving less than half of the maintenance support I should have been receiving, which basically meant that in the run-up to the end of the first term of this year, so end of November going into December, I literally couldn't afford to feed myself. Was not a fun time. Thankfully that's all sorted out now and I'm back to being able to afford food and rent and general other things that you need to be able to live independently at university. But the amount of stuff I had to go through to get to that point was absolutely insane. So rather than sit here and keep it to myself, I figured I might as well make this video in the hopes that someone somewhere might find it useful. Now for reference, when I talk about student finance, I'm talking specifically about Student Finance England, because that's who I deal with, having grown up in England. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if or how the system differs in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland, so if that's what applies to you, go and double check all of this stuff yourself. But a lot of these tips are fairly general anyway, so you never know. So if you're new to dealing with student finance and you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, you don't know what any of this means, here's a very, very brief crash course. So when you apply to student finance, you get a tuition fee loan and a maintenance loan. The tuition fee loan is what gets paid directly to your university, and that's what pays for your course. The other half is your maintenance loan, and that's what gets paid to you, and that's basically what you're going to be living on. Now the amount of maintenance loan that you get depends on whether you're living in London or not, and also whether you're still living with your parents. So for example, a full-time student living outside of London and away from their parents would be eligible for £8,430 in the academic year 2017-18. But this amount does change every year, and like I said, you would be eligible for more if you're living in London and less if you're living with your parents or guardians. And also, not everyone will be eligible for that maximum amount because the maintenance loan is means tested, which basically means that they'll decide how much you're entitled to depending on your household income. Now for most students that will be depending on their parent or guardian's income, but you can do it based on your own if you can prove that you've been financially independent for 3 years, I think, before going to university. And essentially, the lower your household income is, the more support you'll be entitled to. The idea with that is that higher earning families should be more able to support their children while they're at university. Is that fair? That's a debate for another video. There's a link in the description to the .gov website for student finance, which has loads of information, and it also has a calculator if you want to go and see how much you could be entitled to. You can also read about the way that repayments work on that website as well, but I won't go into that now. So here are my best tips for making sure that your student finance application goes as smoothly as possible. Number one, most important one, is to start early. I really cannot emphasize this enough. The best way to make sure that your funding will be ready in place for the start of the university term is to get your application in early and give yourself the time to make sure everything is in place. The system usually opens sometime in March, so a lot of students will tend to do it over their Easter break. And if you're going to be starting university in September, don't wait for results day, because I can pretty much guarantee you if you wait until the end of August to submit your application, it will not be sorted, and no one wants to be skint during freshers, trust me. If for whatever reason your plans change or you decide not to go to university at all, you can always change it later or cancel it entirely. My second tip is to label everything you send in. Now that might seem obvious, but just write your customer reference number on the back of any envelopes you send into them. The main reason for doing this is that it just makes it a lot more difficult for them to misplace things, which, believe it or not, is something I've been told twice. And this is especially important for your first application because they'll ask for evidence to confirm your identity, and when they do that, they need it to be originals. So that will usually mean you have to send in your passport or your birth certificate or your driving license. And those are things that you don't want to go losing. And for that point, it's usually worth spending a little bit extra and sending it as recorded delivery, because one, you don't want it to get lost in the mail, and two, you know exactly when they received it if they have to sign for it. And if you're applying for means tested support, they'll also want evidence of your family's earnings for the relevant tax year. The tax year that they'll ask for evidence for is usually 2 years before the academic year. So for the 17-18 academic year, they'll want the tax year 15-16. And this is to make sure that people will definitely have earnings reports when they're doing their applications. And also, you don't need to send the originals of those. Photocopies will be absolutely fine. Tip number 3. Don't be shy about calling. If you ever feel like there's not a lot happening with your application, or you're expecting to have heard something, or you just want to check that they've received some evidence that you sent in, it's always worth giving them a call. You will get very familiar with the hold music while you're doing this, but honestly, in my experience, it's better just to call and check than to wait to hear something. And also, it's good practice to get in the habit of making a note of what date and time you called and who you spoke to, which they will always tell you, but it makes it easier for you to track something back if you get told something that was in fact incorrect. Tip number 4. don't forget about your declaration. So when they've processed your application and decided what you're entitled to, they'll send you a letter confirming this, and it will also have a declaration. The declaration is to say that you've not lied on your application, and all you need to do is put your name on it, sign it, date it, and send it back to them. Having said that, it's incredibly easy to put it somewhere, completely forget about it, and keep telling yourself you'll do it later, and before you know it, it's the last week of August and you've still not done it, and you won't get any payments until they've had that back. So it's worth just getting out of the way. So if you just keep an eye on your application, track how things are going, and give yourself and Student Finance plenty of time, then you should have everything in place ready for the start of the year. But if for whatever reason things don't go so smoothly, here are a few things I've learned. Current year assessments. So like I said before, the tax year that Student Finance will ask for evidence for is quite a long time before the actual year that you'll be at uni. Now, for most people that's not going to be an issue, but say one of your parents lost their job in that time. Their earnings for the tax year that Student Finance want could be a lot higher than what they're earning at the moment, and that could mean a lot less financial support for you, and your parents might not be able to afford to make up for that. So the way to get around this is to do a current year assessment. Now, this is reserved for people who have had a 15% drop in their household earnings between the tax year that Student Finance want and the current tax year. And what happens with this is you'll be asked to provide an estimate of your earnings for the current year. And at the end of the tax year, which will be during your year at uni, you'll have to submit evidence of what your earnings were just to confirm that your estimate was correct. They might not actually tell you that last part though, as I found out last July. The second most useful thing is student practitioners. Now, when you phone Student Finance normally, after however many millennia on hold, you will get through to someone. And with all the best will in the world, those people are not often trained to deal with very complicated situations. And they'll usually just tell you what their computer screen says, which may be something you've already been told, or it may just be wrong. Now, if you find yourself in that situation, the best thing you can do is to go to your student union, and if you make a phone call through them, you'll be put through to a student practitioner. And that is basically the next level up from the people that you usually speak to on the phone, but you can only access them through your student union. And also, generally speaking, if you're really struggling financially, it's worth letting your student union know, because there might be a few things that they can do to help you out. And also, if you do find yourself struggling financially during the university year, most unis will have a student hardship fund, which is normally a non-repayable grant to help students who can't afford basic things like rent or food. I'd imagine that the application process for this will vary between universities, but at mine I basically had to submit 12 weeks of bank statements to show that I'd not blown all my money on things that I didn't need. Different universities might not require that, but it's always worth asking. I think that's just about everything I've got, but of course I will leave some links to info in the description, and I am more than happy to answer any questions in the comments if I can. But please remember, I'm not an expert. So I hope that you found this useful, and I will see you again soon. Goodbye. And while I've got you here, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that the government are slowly making it more and more expensive to go to university. So if you care about your own education, the education of future generations, the NHS, please, please, please register to vote. There is a link in the description.